Hey, everyone. There's a major story this week involving Turkey, Israel, and one of the most sensitive pieces of military technology in the world, the F-35. And we're going to start this off by just playing a clip of President Trump, about a minute long, and then we'll explain what on earth is going on here. So let me pull this up on screen. This is President Trump in the Oval Office. Sitting next to him is Mark Rutte, who is the head of NATO. So here we go. Here's President Trump.
According to that, Mr.
And I think that Erdogan is, look, he loves Turkey, right? He's doing a great job. He loves Turkey. I love the U.S., but he loves Turkey, and he's doing a great job. He's a respected man, a respected leader, and he's been a friend of mine. Now, I shouldn't say that, because guys like Peter would say, oh, he likes Erdogan. He likes Erdogan. No, Peter won't. Peter doesn't. Some of the others, let's say. But Erdogan is a strong man, but he's been everything I've ever asked him for, he's done.
And like that, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General clearly pointed out that allies want to do defense business with you, and Turkey is definitely one of them. Absolutely. They want the F-110 jet engines, and they want the F-35 fighter jets. Yeah. Are you going to Turkey with a big gift bag?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Look, he's a member of NATO. Some people don't consider him so, but he really is. He's a strong member of NATO. Yeah, I'm going to probably do something that's going to make him very happy.
I'm probably going to do something that's going to make him very happy. Okay. So what are we talking about here? There's been a fight brewing for months. So back in April, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, was quoted as saying that we're soon going to solve the problem. U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack said on Friday, this is April 17th, 2 months ago, that he expected Washington and Ankara to soon solve the issue of U.S. sanctions over Turkey's purchase of S-400 missile defenses. I think you're going to see the S-400 situation solved soon. From my boss's point of view, meaning Trump, acceptance into an F-35 program is fine. He said this at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum that took place a couple months ago. So it's totally fine. So what does this mean? That's the U.S. ambassador going on the record months ago saying that President Trump is fine with Turkey in the F-35 program. Fast forward to this month, and we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio giving testimony to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And look at what he says there. Here's Secretary of State. Turkey's status in the F-35 program cannot change. Secretary of State Marco Rubio indicated that the Trump administration currently lacks the legal authority to alter Turkey's status in the F-35 program, citing statutory restrictions linked to Ankara's acquisition of the Russian S-400 air defense system. We'll explain that soon. The issue arose during Rubio's testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Representative Dina Titus challenged recent comments by U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, suggesting that Turkey should be brought back into the F-35 program. Titus argued that such remarks were inconsistent with existing U.S. law and longstanding American policy, and asked Rubio directly whether Turkey could receive F-15s or F-35s. In response, Rubio recalled that Turkey had originally been a participant in the F-35 program, but was excluded after purchasing Russian-made S-400s. Again, we will explain those very soon. The reason why they can't get them is because they purchased the S-400 from the Russians, Rubio said. When Titus noted that Turkey still possesses the S-400s and remains subject to mandatory sanctions, Rubio agreed and stressed that the matter is governed by law. Correct, said Rubio. So as you know, that's governed by statute. He then added, right now we don't have that choice because it's governed by statute, both provisions of the National Defense Authorization Act and statute. Okay, there we go. So what is this? The law says no. Trump can decide to give F-35s to Erdogan, but the law says no. So why does the law say no? So it comes down to these Russian-made air defenses called the S-400, which Turkey bought back in 2017, and it still owns them today. There's an actual U.S. statute on the books that says that Turkey cannot get the F-35 unless the government certifies in writing to Congress that Turkey no longer owns these things, this S-400. Okay, I'll explain why it's a deal breaker in a few minutes. I'm sorry I keep leading you on here, but it's a little bit, I have to explain this, the right way. So stay with me. But keep that name in your head, S-400. It's the hinge that this entire story turns on. And here's where it gets interesting. I just want to lay out the conflict in the administration. Just so then shortly after Rubio says that, meaning we're now a few weeks later, and we have Vice President Vance, who was asked about President Trump's comments. He was asked about President Trump's comments that we just played about maybe giving F-35s to Turkey, bringing Turkey back into the F-35 program. So this is from 2 days ago. Vance says review underway to see how Turkey can get F-35 fighter jets. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance indicated on Wednesday, a couple days ago, that a review was underway to see how the United States could sell Turkey F-35 fighter jets, given the acquisition of S-400s. Pete and the entire team, meaning Pete Hegseth and the entire team, are reviewing this right now because there are certain things that we have to certify have happened in order to comply with American law. The president has asked us to do that, Vance told reporters. Okay, that means that it sounds like we have a green light, or they're trying to get the green light to sell F-35s to Turkey. So in the space of 2 months, you've got the U.S. ambassador to Turkey saying it's fine if Turkey gets the F-35s. You then have the Secretary of State saying, well, in front of the House committee saying no because the law says you can't. And now you have the Vice President saying that they're reviewing how to get around that and how to get around that law, or how to be able to sell them. So what you see here is that there's some contradiction in the administration, and Turkey's pushing hard. And by the way, it's Democrats and Republicans. This is bipartisan. We have Republican Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis, who posted a photo this week of Erdogan together with the former president of Iran and with Vladimir Putin. Right? And you see what she writes here. What does she write? There is bipartisan opposition talking about F-35s to Turkey. As long as Turkey is under the leadership of Erdogan, who aligns himself with Iran and Russia, harbors Hamas, and remains the only NATO member to not sanction Russia, Turkey should not receive our best jets and military equipment. And there were other members of Congress who weighed in also against this from both sides of the aisle. So I want to break this whole thing down. First of all, why does the F-35 matter so much? We'll have to get into that. And why is Turkey's S-400 Russian system such a deal breaker? And how did we get from Turkey being a founding partner in the F-35 program back in 2002, 24 years ago, to where we are this week? So let's get into it. Before we get into the politics, you need to understand what's actually at stake, because the F-35 is not just a fighter plane. It's not just like selling a piece of equipment. It's not even really one weapon. It's a platform. And that's why they always call it the F-35 program. You'll notice that they don't talk about selling F-35s. They talk about bringing Turkey into the F-35 program because it's an intelligence sharing platform and much, much more. It was a senior Air Force commander who described it as a system of systems. Its stealth sensors and communications don't just make the F-35 hard to detect. It's not just about the stealth. They make every other plane and ground unit around it more effective too. Israel used this a lot when Iran had massive missile and drone attacks against Israel in April 2024. The F-35's ability to network with everything else was actually making the air defenses against those ballistic missiles work better, even though the F-35 wasn't actually the thing shooting them down. There's something specific to Israel here also. Israel flies its own variant of the F-35 called the F-35I Adir. And it's not that America, built Israel a better jet. It's that the U.S. gave Israel permission to rip out parts of the standard system and plug in its own. And Israeli-made technology is in the Israeli F-35. So Israel swapped its own electronic warfare suite. It built specifically to jam Russian-made systems like the S-400. It integrated its own weapons into the F-35. It even manufactures its own wings and added extra fuel tanks so its jets can reach Iran without refueling mid-air. And only Israel is allowed to make adjustments to the F-35. The other countries in the program are not allowed to. Like meaning the UK, Italy, Australia, whoever is in the F-35 program, they fly the standard version, the way Lockheed Martin built it. Israel's the only customer that has that permission to make its own adjustments to the F-35. So when we talk about Turkey wanting back into the program, understand that it's bad if Turkey gets even the baseline F-35, but we should still remember as supporters of Israel that it doesn't mean that Turkey has the F-35 that Israel has. Okay, but even so, having the same baseline jet with the capabilities of the regular F-35 is still enough to create a real danger. So let's go further. When we talk about whether Turkey gets this jet, it's not just about the transaction itself. We're talking about whether a country with Turkey's track record gets access to the most advanced military technology the United States has, and everything that technology touches. As I said, the F-35 is an intelligence sharing platform, and it has tremendous capabilities beyond just being a jet. So now let's get to the S-400. Now that you understand a little bit more about the F-35. The S-400 is a Russian-made air defense system, very advanced, and it's built specifically to track and shoot down advanced aircraft, including stealth aircraft like the F-35. If Turkey operates both systems on the same soil as part of the same military, the Pentagon's concern, America's concern, is that the S-400's radar could essentially study the F-35. It could learn its stealth signature. It could learn the way it moves, the way it reflects radar. And that could allow the S-400 system to crack the F-35 system. And that information wouldn't stay in Turkey. It would end up back in Moscow and potentially going to China and even to Iran. And this is the exact reason the U.S. gave when it threw Turkey out of the F-35 program in 2019. It's the reason Congress passed actual binding law afterwards. Remember, this is not a policy preference. It's a law saying that F-35 cannot be transferred to Turkey unless the Secretaries of State and Defense jointly certify in writing to Congress that Turkey no longer possesses the S-400 and won't buy anything like it again. That's what the law says. They're not allowed to own it at all. So that's what Rubio was referring to when he was talking in Congress a couple weeks ago. And as of right now, by every available report, Turkey still has the S-400 sitting in its warehouses. It hasn't turned them on, but it owns them. And that's what the law says. They can't own them. Now, I want to back up about over 20 years and lay out the whole story from the beginning so that you really understand where we are. In 2002, Turkey joined the F-35 program as one of the original 8 international partners. They invested over $1 billion, and they were planning to buy over 100 jets. They were one of the partners. Turkish companies ended up manufacturing about 1,000 different F-35 components. The original countries involved participated in the manufacturing and the development of the jet. Fast forward to 2016. This is a key. In July 2016, a faction inside the Turkish military attempted a military coup. They attempted a coup against Erdogan. They bombed the parliament. They tried to kill him. The coup failed. But Erdogan came out of it basically suspicious of his own military, of his own air force. And that's where the plotters had been the strongest. So there are some analysts who think that that's why the very next year Erdogan jumped at Putin's offer to sell him the S-400, and that it wasn't only for defense against outside enemies, but as insurance against his own military ever trying that again. Okay, that aside, in 2017, this is the key to the chronology. In 2017, Turkey signs a deal for 4 S-400 batteries, roughly $2.5 billion deal with, and that's a deal with the Russians. Okay, so he buys the S-400s. 2018 and 19, the U.S. spends over a year trying to talk Turkey out of this deal with the Russians. They even offered Patriot missile systems as an alternative. Erdogan refused every time. In one of those moments, he told reporters flatly that it's a done deal. So the first S-400 components arrive in Turkey in July 2019, and boom, right away, within days, the U.S. removes Turkey from the F-35 program. Okay? 2020, Congress imposes sanctions on Turkey's Defense Procurement Agency, meaning freezing assets, banning exports, the works. In practice, it meant that Turkey's own defense industry was cut off from American export licenses and loans. Its top defense officials personally lost access to the U.S. financial system. Pretty serious. Fast forward again, 2021 to 2024. Biden administration, Turkey tries repeatedly to find a workaround. Their defense minister, Hulusi Akar, proposes a model that he calls the Crete model to sell the S-400s that they have to a different country. We'll get rid of them. We'll sell them to a different country. Cyprus once did this. They had a Russian system and they sold it to Greece, who then put it in storage in Crete. So the U.S. said, no, that won't fly. Turkey then bought F-16s, which Biden approved in 2023 as a payoff to Turkey for Turkey allowing Sweden into NATO. Turkey originally was going to block Sweden's joining of NATO, and Biden agreed to sell him F-16s in exchange for Turkey not blocking Sweden joining NATO. So they got F-16s. Turkey, in this time period, Turkey also unveils its own homegrown stealth fighter, the Khan, which runs on American engines. And here's the part that matters most for our purposes. Every time the U.S. gave Turkey something, the F-16 deal in particular, Erdogan did not become more in line with American foreign policy. He escalated. He escalated his rhetoric. After getting the F-16 sale approved, he cut off trade and diplomatic relations with Israel. He called Hamas a liberation movement. He was quoted as praying that Allah will destroy and devastate Zionist Israel. So selling him F-15s has not drawn him, or F-16s, has not drawn him any closer to Israel and to American foreign policy interests in the region. In 2025, Erdogan calls Trump directly. This is last year, asking to be let back into the F-35 program and asking to have the sanctions lifted. And now we are in 2026, and Trump is publicly hinting that he'll do something that Turkey will, that'll make Erdogan very happy. Vance says a review is underway. The administration is reportedly moving ahead with selling Turkey dozens of jet engines for the Khan, for their stealth fighter. And meanwhile, Rubio is insisting that the F-35 is legally off the table. And the timing, as you saw in the clip of Trump, has to do with the fact that Turkey is hosting the NATO summit next month. And that's what that reporter meant when he said, are you going to be heading out to Ankara with a bag of gifts? And Trump said, yeah, Trump's going to be there. And let me explain why this is so important for Israel. Israeli and Turkish pilots are both operating over Syria right now on a regular basis. Israel has been, it's very important to Israel's strategic interests, Israel's security interests, that Israel retain its freedom of operation over the skies of Syria. That's the corridor that Israel uses to get to Iran. It's also important for Israel to prevent any kind of buildup of weapons or air defenses in Syria. Okay, so Israel's striking in Syria periodically to deny weapons and bases to the new regime. And Turkey is trying to set up its own military base deep inside Syria on a former Syrian air base within range, well within range of areas Israel considers a red line. The two countries have actually begun preliminary deconfliction talks mediated by Azerbaijan, specifically because the risk of accidental or not so accidental clash in the airspace over Syria is real. So you have the Syrians and the Israelis are both, they're in this kind of this power struggle there in the airspace above Syria. Now picture if in that airspace both countries had F-35s. Or picture Turkish Patriot missile batteries, which the U.S. had offered to give Turkey as a consolation prize for giving up the S-400s. Imagine those ending up being deployed in Syria instead of on Turkish soil, preventing Israeli aircraft from their freedom of operation over the region. So there was a report from JINSA. JINSA is the Jewish Institute of National Security for America, and they published a report. Right? They published a report. The flight risk, Turkey and the F-35. Here, let me pull it up here. Here's the report. This is the JINSA report. Flight risk, Turkey and the F-35. They published this last year. It's a 32-page report. No, I'm not going to read it. Of course, I'm not going to read it. But in the end of the report, they make a series of recommendations. So I'm going to read to you the recommendations they make. They talk about all the problems with Turkey getting the F-35. And they say, it appears the Trump administration is favorably disposed to grant Turkey's request. If it insists on doing so, we recommend that it only offer Turkey re-entry into the F-35 program under very strict conditions. To wit, Turkey must, and they make 5 recommendations, meet U.S. legal requirements to get rid of the S-400, restore normal diplomatic and economic relations with Israel, end all forms of support for Hamas, including allowing Hamas to raise funds on Turkish territory, enter into a serious, preferably U.S.-led deconfliction mechanism with Israel over Syria, and respect Greek and Cypriot air and sea territorial boundaries, as well as their exclusive economic zones. You see, that's another ingredient in this story, is that the Greeks and the Cypriots are also very worried about Turkey getting the F-35 and continuing its drive to regional dominance, because they're they very much threaten the Greece and Cyprus. They're not on friendly terms, and Greece and Cyprus are very concerned about the rise of Turkey, which is why they signed a defense and security alliance with Israel at towards the end of last year. So it's not just Israel that's concerned about this. So here's where things stand. U.S. law says no. The vice president says we're reviewing how to say yes anyway. Erdogan has spent the last several years proving that every concession he gets is followed by more hostility towards Israel. And in a few weeks, Trump is going to be standing in Ankara at a NATO summit with this exact question hanging over the room. So we're going to track this closely. I think what happens at that summit is going to tell us a lot more than anything said in Washington this week. And this issue is going to be in the headlines. It's going to be talked about. It could get contentious. So the story's far, far, far from over. What I'm really just doing in this video is setting you up to understand what is taking place and what's going to take place over the next little while on this very important topic. Okay, I hope that made some sense. Hope you found it helpful. And please continue to like, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. Tell people what we're doing on this channel. I read a lot of the comments, and I really appreciate the comments, especially when people tell me that they find these videos so informative and useful. I know it's kind of a no frills channel. We don't have any, like intro music or, fancy graphics or anything like that. But I'm always open to suggestions of things that we could do to make these videos better. All right. Thanks a lot. God bless.